Hey everyone, what's good and welcome back. This week's Monday's music journey has us listening to the 1979 album from Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. I see this album tossed around a lot when it comes to the conversation of the best albums of all time or most seminal, so I decided to finally give it a go and listen to it for myself. With that in mind, it's probably going to be hard to say something that hasn't already been said by somebody, but I'll give it a try anyways. I'm also not too familiar with this band, or even the genres of post-punk or goth rock for that matter, but what I have heard from these genres, I do enjoy, so I'm listening to this in hopes of expanding my tastes and hopefully finding a new album which I enjoy. Just how much will I enjoy it though? That's what we're gonna find out, so let's just get into it. I love the intro of this song, honestly. That drum beat is really catchy and so are those rubbery bass lines. The riff then comes in, which is really compelling, which leads to these low, rich vocals performed by Ian Curtis as he speaks on feeling depressed and wondering how quote-unquote normal people can seem satisfied and if he can also feel the same way. It's a really somber sentiment which contrasts with the upbeat, lively instrumental, which is pretty interesting to me. I absolutely adore that riff that floats in after the first verse as well. It's done so fantastically. The second verse seems to see Ian speaking on his mental health further, as these swirling effects then come in and add a whirlwind feeling, which most likely was intentional, as it really paints a picture of the typhoon he most likely is feeling in his head. The third verse and outro then continue to follow depressing topical suit as that animated instrumental continues to sound just as excellent in the background. I also love how Ian gets far more expressive on the outro as he repeatedly shouts feeling. Overall, this is an amazing song, instrumentally, vocally, and lyrically. I have no complaints here. It's such a solemn and melancholic yet spirited and bright song. I really like it. This one is a 10 out of 10 to me. The song kicks off with this thick, luscious bass line and steady drums paired with a sharp guitar riff that all come together to form a really pleasant sounding instrumental. The riff then lowers in tone as it becomes the backdrop for Ian to let out his bellowing vocals once again, this time speaking on the wickedness of war. I love the refrain that sees the kick drums build up as the shrill sound comes in. I'm not sure what's creating that sound, if it's a guitar or anything, but whatever it is, I absolutely love it, as it comes together with all the other instrumentation to create such a moody ambiance. The instrumental section after the second refrain is very sobering as well, as that sharp riff from the intro that I enjoyed so much makes a return. I really like how it seems as if Ian becomes much more impassioned as well when the fourth verse begins, as he begins to stridently sing. It really seems as though he's really fervent about the response to the question, when will it end? That riff that appears at the outro as well, that sounds like it's floating above the rest of the instrumentation, is just superb as well. Overall, this is another really good song that I like a good bit. I don't quite enjoy it as much as the previous one, but it's terrific nonetheless. This one is a 9.5 out of 10 to me. The drums, bass line, and riff that fade in sound really somber to me, which is a feeling that has been prevalent so far, which I enjoy. These reverbed and delayed guitar embellishments then slide in and sound so ghostly and ethereal as Ian gives his vocal performance, this time detailing wanting and maybe even getting someone, but not necessarily having everything work out and possibly even being the one to blame. It's a compelling narrative that Ian performs pretty well. Overall, it's a relatively straightforward song with little variation instrumentally or vocally, but what is here sounds stellar, especially those embellishments of reverb and delayed guitar that I mentioned. I really do like the song as well. It's another 9.5 out of 10 to me. I like that really foreboding intro with this just dark ambiance and despondent sounds coming in and out until the drums, bass line, and guitar come in. Instrumentally, this is another one that sounds relatively upbeat, which is another incredible contrast from the subject matter at hand, performed solemnly by Ian. On this song, he relays how apathetic he feels towards life and how it seems like he isn't afraid of death anymore. It's really well delivered, even if it's pretty sad, as Ian varies his performance in range as the song goes on. This nice little instrumental interlude then comes in with these beeping synths that I find to be enjoyable before returning to the original instrumental until returning once again for the outro. Overall, this is a good song that I like, but it doesn't necessarily hit me personally like some of the other ones did. It's not bad at all, and I do like it, especially lyrically, but it just doesn't reach that bar for one reason or another. This one is an 8 out of 10 to me personally. I really like that what sounds to be a reverse vocal sample. It sounds really demented and dark to me personally. The drums and bass line then kick in and make way for a thick, rich riff that adds a grand feeling instrumentally. The riff then changes up a bit melody-wise and becomes more eloquent sounding to me personally. Ian then enters with his signature depressive vocals as he details a failed relationship and how it led him to contemplate suicide. I really love the melody he sings on this song. It's really infectious. This instrumental interlude then also appears, which brings in a thick bassline and sharp riff as Ian then returns with the second verse, sounding much more impassioned, which is such a welcome change of pace. That outro where he sings, "It Was Me," is so excellent as well, honestly. That riff at the outro as well, wow, that just sounds so good. It's so well performed. Overall, the song is amazing. I love every aspect about it and honestly have no complaints whatsoever. This one is a 10 out of 10 to me personally. This groovy drum beat starts the song with this interesting cowbell, if it's a cowbell at all, which makes way for a nice subdued little riff. Ian comes in with his deep vocals as they fill with bravado whenever he says "lost control," which is really compelling. On this song, he speaks on an epileptic girl losing control of her body whenever she has an epileptic episode, which Ian apparently could relate to. This nice, gritty riff comes in after the first verse that remains present throughout the second as well, which I find to be enjoyable. The riff continues throughout the instrumental bridge as it changes up a bit in tone and melody, which I can appreciate. Overall, it's a decent song, but much like Insight, doesn't really reach the same level of enjoyment that some previous ones have for me personally. This one just doesn't have much variation, and what is here is just good to me, but not amazing. This one is a 7.5 out of 10 to me. I really like the combination of the bass line and cymbal that begin the whole song. It's a really compelling build-up for what's to come. The riff that comes in when the drums finally drop is pretty well done and I find it to be enjoyable. Ian then comes in with his signature delivery singing about searching for somebody on the first verse, then feeling lonely even while being on stage in front of a multitude of fans on the second verse. It's a well-performed narrative that I enjoy a good bit. The riff that comes in after the first verse and the outro as well is really sharp and once again sounds as if it's floating above the rest of the instrumentation, which I enjoy. Overall, it's a good song. I like a decent bit. Even if it doesn't go above and beyond like some of the others that were heard previously, it's still good nonetheless. I'm feeling an 8.5 out of 10 on this one. I love that bass line. It's so catchy, honestly. Paired with the repetitive rhythm of the delayed drums and that guitar melody, it just creates an overall captivating instrumental. Ian enters with his signature vocal delivery once again and laments about religion and how it may be a hindrance to some and lead them astray. I really like the reverb guitar licks that enter after the first verse. They really add a lot to the relatively simple instrumental. I enjoy how the bass line changes up a bit towards the latter half of the song and adds another guitar riff as well. That sounds equally as enjoyable to me as the first. Overall, this is another straightforward song with not a whole lot of variation in terms of instrumentation or vocal performance, but I like the narrative and what is here does sound good to me. This one is an 8 out of 10 to me personally. I love the fast-paced drum beat and riff that begin the song. They're so catchy to me honestly and create such a dynamic feeling. Peter Hook, the bassist who is lead vocals for the song, matches the energy of the instrumental as he sounds much more vibrant as well with his vocal performance, as he apparently gives an homage to the book Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs. Ian gives backing vocals on the song, and he really is an intriguing contrast from Peter's dynamic vocals, as he sounds much more monotone, which I enjoy. That riff that comes in after the chorus as well is so well done, honestly. I like it a lot. I love how on the bridge, the instrumental takes a bit of a backseat and lets Peter and Ian shine even more, as they both sound as good as ever. Overall, this is another pretty straightforward song, but it's so lively and just fun to listen to in all honesty. This one is a 9 out of 10 to me personally. The ambiance in the intro of the song is otherworldly, and I enjoyed so much for that fact. The steady drum beat and thick bass line paired with these varied sound effects that come in and out are a really good match and add to that feeling as well. Ian really stretches out that "we" when he says "we were strangers," which is a drastic change from his usual delivery on this album up until this point. It's a welcome change of pace for me personally, not just on the chorus but on the verse as well. He has a really interesting performance as he continues with these solemn stretched out deliveries. It seems as though he's closing out the album with one more final depressing narrative as he bleakly depicts his failing marriage. The instrumental remains constant throughout his performance as embellishments of guitar licks and other sound effects of glass breaking and air blowing enter and disappear, which are nice little additions to me personally. Overall, it's a really good and depressing outro for an album that can be equally described as such, honestly. I love the steady, dark instrumental and Ian's howling vocals. They come together to create such a gloomy closer, which I enjoy a good bit. This one is a 9 out of 10 to me personally. Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division is 10 tracks and just under 40 minutes long. This is a really good album length for this album to me personally. It doesn't overstay its welcome and it doesn't leave me wanting more either. The sequencing sees this album start off incredibly well with tracks such as Disorder, Day of the Lords, and Candidate. It then kind of drops only a smidge in enjoyability for the last 2/3, but there are still stellar highlights in those 2/3, and it ends off on a good note as well. I believe Disorder is a perfect introduction as it paints the depressing nature of the album to come perfectly, and I Remember Nothing is also a really good closer since it shows us one final yet significant reason for Ian to be feeling this way. The narrative and themes of this album are so bleak, despondent, nihilistic, and depressing, which are honestly some of my favorite themes to be explored in music since it offers such a sense of catharsis. I believe this album does that better than most on the lyrical end, which I greatly admire. For the album length, track sequencing, and overall narrative, I believe a 9 out of 10 is appropriate for everything surrounding the actual music on this album. So if you add that 9 out of 10 along with every other rating I gave the songs on this album, you get an 8.9 out of 10 overall, which I believe is fair. This album is incredibly well done and honestly doesn't have a genuinely bad song on it. My favorites had to be Disorder, New Dawn Fades, Candidate, Day of the Lords, and Interzone. My least favorites had to have been She's Lost Control and Insight. Although these are not bad songs in the slightest, they just personally didn't do it for me like some others on this album did. While depression is a common theme found in music, I believe Unknown Pleasures contains one of the best portrayals in my opinion. Of course, I also have to acknowledge that while I enjoy the topics on this album, it is also incredibly sad how Ian tragically felt the need to take his own life at 23 years old due to these very same feelings he expressed on this album. He left the world incredibly early, and who knows what other amazing art he potentially could have put out. But with that in mind, I can confidently say I have found a new album that I enjoy and believe I have successfully started to expand my taste further. I can't wait to check out Joy Division's other album and discuss it on the channel. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching everybody, and I'll see y'all next time.